So our first speaker today would be Mr. Kang Wee, founder and CEO of REDEX. So would you like to join us, please? Yes. And I'll be moderating this session. Yeah, here.
Just one thing, Karan, before we start, I'll move this. For the people who have joined master classes or workshops, that's the moment to go. They just started workshops here and the workshop here, masterclass here, sorry, and workshop over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Thibaut. And we have two more panelists tuning in all the way from Japan. Coincidentally, they're both in Japan right now. So first, our next panelist would be Mr. Yamashita-san. Yamashita?
Yep. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining us. So he's the founder. Sorry, he is. Hi, Yamashita. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. So yes, so he's a senior researcher in the Institute of Sustainable Energy Policies. And our third panelist, who's also joining us, who happened to be in Japan as well, Dr. Luca del Zilio. He's assistant professor of geophysics in NTU and principal investigator of Earth Observatory of Singapore. Hi, Luca. Can you hear us?
Hi, Karan. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. As Karan said, I'm working at NTU Singapore, but I'm joining from Japan, where I'm attending a conference on geothermal energy and technology.
Thank you so much, Luca. So today, we want to start off by just giving you the time to introduce yourself first. So I would like to start with Wee. Would you like to talk about how your work contributes to the progress of renewable energy, and what is your vision?
Hello. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I think energy transition or renewable energy or decarbonization is a really big topic. And I have always been, since the startup of our company, REDEX, back in 2018, finding ways to make the transition easier or make the transition more practical. So if you hear, if you attend meetings in global conferences in the like of Climate Week, COP, you realize that most of the time you hear about where are the problems to decarbonization. You hardly hear about how do we really decarbonize tomorrow, right? So REDEX is really in the business of doing all the small little things, enabling technologies to enable people to be able to decarbonize tomorrow, literally, and really not to wait for certain milestones to achieve, but to really execute it immediately. So that's what we're trying to do, and the core business that REDEX is in is RECs, Renewable Energy Certificates, and it's subtle and mostly not very well understood commodity in the energy space. RECs is an attribute to prove that you're using renewable power, and it has been this commodity that's used in Europe and US for the last 20, 30 years, even for the compliance market or regulated market. Yeah. So in this part of the world, RECs is new, not so new anymore. And if you see the recent conference in Singapore, there was a big energy conference a couple of weeks back called Singapore International Energy Week. And in every conference within that week, you will hear a lot of people talking about RECs. So what is this RECs all about? Essentially, it's a proof that you are using renewable power even though you are not physically consuming it, right? So why is this important? Because most of the buyers globally, in order to prove that they are using renewable power, it's almost impossible for example, for a data center, to build a 100 megawatt solar power plant just beside the data center, and it's even harder to make sure that the data center needs to use renewable power at night, when solar is only producing in the day. So REDEX is an instrument that enables that. And lately, as more and more people begin to understand what REDEX is, it has been, a very positive move towards, a lot of buyers looking for this instrument, and a lot of generators, wanting to fulfill that requirement, and hence enabling a lot of new renewable power plants to be built, right? Singapore in particular, because the REDEX demand is very, very high and supply is low, and is fanning out to the rest of the world. So essentially this is what REDEX does, and how we enable the renewable market.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. And now we will talk about, we will hand over the time to Yamashita. Would you like to give a brief introduction about your community-based energy initiatives?
Okay, thanks. So I share my screen. Okay. Right. So we are a research institute in Japan, basically, Institute for Sustainable Energy Policies. And our institute was established in 2000. So we have a 24 years history. And we also promote community-based renewable energy project, especially photovoltaic and wind. And this picture shows a photovoltaic project in Fukushima. As you know, the Fukushima Daiichi power plant accident in 2011, and the community, local people want to start a renewable energy project by themselves. So we help them to start this project. Also, the farmer in Fukushima, he had to quit his agriculture business because of the accident. Then he started a new renewable energy project in Fukushima, and we help it. So he started an agrivoltaic project, photovoltaic on the agricultural land. So now he is a project owner of renewable energy and agriculture, both. And also he starts a cow farming under the photovoltaic. Like this, we support a very localized project in various cities in Japan. Some promote a wind project and some promote hydro project. And it's based on a local context and their original business. So there are still many projects in Japan, but this local community project or community power project can enhance the local participation and also local economy and other their business and others. So I hope this community power project is accepted in other countries and other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamashita. And now my question to Luca. So could you share more about your area of research and what are you working on and your vision?
Thank you, Karan, for the introduction. Yes, I come from the academic side as a principal investigator at the Earth Observatory of Singapore and assistant professor at the Asian School of the Environment. The research we do in my group is mostly to understand natural hazards and creating sustainable energy solutions, particularly in the case of geothermal systems and carbon sequestration. So I recently moved to Singapore and I'm currently leading the computational geophysics lab, where we basically leverage simulations, theory, and experiments to focus on the physics behind critical energy and environmental challenges, working at basically at the intersection between energy security and environmental resilience. When we talk about renewable energy, a large part of my work focuses on using Earth heat and sustainable energy source. This is the case for enhanced geothermal system, or EGS, as we are used to call, which represent a promising frontier here. EGS has the potential to generate reliable, low carbon power, which estimates suggest that geothermal energy alone could probably supply between 5 to 10% of world electricity demand by 2050. This is significant, especially considering that geothermal energy operates continuously, unlike solar or wind, which are weather dependent. And our research explores also how safely extract this energy by studying how rocks respond to the stress and the fluid movement in the underground, which helps in designing more efficient geothermal systems and managing the seismic risk that is associated with that. Another area of research is the carbon sequestration, so capturing carbon, CO2, and trying to store it underground. Carbon capture and storage, as you have seen also in previous presentation, also called CCS, is gaining momentum. And the Economic Development Board in Singapore has also set a target to capture at least 2 million tons of CO2 annually by 2030 as part of the effort to make Jurong Island a more refined hub and more sustainable. Just to give kind of an idea, we are talking about something that, at least from the US Environmental Protection Agency, a typical passenger for a vehicle emits roughly about 4 to 5 tons of CO2 per year. So that means that if you put the 2 million tons of CO2 annually in perspective, it's the equivalent of taking roughly 430,000 cars off road annually. So our role at NTU is to improve methods to predict how CO2 behave underground, ensuring that these storage methods are safe, effective, and they can also be scaled across different geological settings.
Okay, so now that the audience have a clearer picture of what these three panelists, who come from very different angles, do, so now let's talk about challenges. So in your role for companies to adopt renewable energy, what are the main challenges and the obstacles?
There are two groups of corporates who wants to decarbonize, right? And when it comes to decarbonization, you really have the three different scopes you need to address. So I'll address specifically on scope 2, right? It's not subtle because a lot of the brand owners, their scope 3 is essentially the supply chain scope 2, right? So this is a really important aspect of decarbonization, and in my opinion, the low-hanging fruit that can be adopted. So where are the challenges? So I think from a corporate perspective, to procure renewable power, the main obstacle is really on a country level perspective. The ideal state of many of the large corporates who wants to be renewable, a lot of them resides in US and Europe. And for the last 20 years, in these countries, it's extremely easy to procure renewable power in the form of a power purchase agreement, right? It's a well-understood market. The electricity market is liberalized in most of those countries in Europe and in the US. However, in Asia, in the global south, the electricity market has not reached the maturity whereby it's really easy for you to procure electricity directly from the generator. Singapore being an exception, right? In many parts of Southeast Asia, in Asia, the broader Asia region, and even in Latin America and Middle East, most governments are trying to liberalize the electricity market, but it's going to take some time. Singapore being a very, very efficient country took us 30 years to liberalize the market, right? So this is a big challenge. However, the saving grace is you don't really need to engage in a power purchase agreement in order to prove that you're using renewable power. That's where REDEX comes in, right? I think there needs to be enough education to the corporates, and more importantly also to the supply chain, that REDEX is as important, if not more efficient, in terms of enabling a corporate to procure renewable power. the common mindset of the large corporate is that I want to engage in a power purchase agreement from entity A to entity B to prove, right, that I'm using renewable, right? But you realize that the basic fundamentals of proving that you're using the renewable power, even though you have a power purchase agreement, is the fact that you need to register the renewable energy certificates and retire to your name as a buyer, on top of the fact that you have a power purchase agreement, right? Because that is the ultimate proof, right? That you own that environmental attribute that comes from the electricity grid infrastructure. So it's no different from a corporate who doesn't engage in a power purchase agreement, but purchase the REDEX on an unbundled basis, right? To prove that you're using renewable power. So I consume 100 units of electricity. I know the grid has 500 units of renewable energy in the form of certificates. I buy 100 of them. I can make a very concrete, clear proof, right, that I'm using renewable power. So the challenge is in the mindset of the large corporates, understanding the market in the global south. I think the way I look at how the market has evolved over the last couple of years is that these large corporates are beginning to understand and starting to go to their supply chain to say that, hey, you know what, as my supplier, you are requested or you are required, for some cases, to buy renewable energy, could be in the form of a power purchase agreement or REDEX, in order to fulfill your requirement as reducing your scope 2 and hence my scope 3, right? So to summarize, the challenge is in education, right? And I think we have made really good progress, across the entire global south to educate to these corporate buyers that REDEX is actually the right instrument to use.
Thank you so much. And for Yamashita, I have a question for you. So what are the challenges in the consensus-based community energy initiatives that you are doing?
Mm-hmm. The first one is political willingness. The current ruling party in Japan and also Ministry of Economy don't give any incentives for such community-based projects. And the second one is grid constraints. In the southern part of Japan, even though there's a rich photovoltaic potential, but you can't start a new project because of the lack of enough grid. And the third one is negative perceptions or negative consensus these days. Right after the introduction of feed-in tariff policy in Japan in 2011, there are much number of new photovoltaic projects, and some of them bring local conflict. Then, these days, the large-scale photovoltaic project got a very negative response by the local people. Even though we promote the small-scale distributed photovoltaic projects, still there are many local concerns or some objection for new projects. The big challenge is how to change their perceptions and how to show our good project and what's the local benefit we can bring with the renewable energy project. That's a big challenge. Thank you.
Okay, I see. And for Luca, if we dive deeper into geothermal, what are some of the challenges, whether they are regulatory, technological, or economic? What do you have to say about that? Yeah.
Well, before starting with the challenges, I must say that Southeast Asia sits on what we call it in geology, the Pacific Ring of Fire, which position in one of the world's most geothermally active regions. This gives us a unique opportunity to use geothermal energy as a stable, low emission source that we can help to power the region. And Indonesia, for example, has about 40% of the world's geothermal reserves. And we are not only tapping into the fraction of that capacity because we are only using something like 3 gigawatts in the region, which has potentially something that is over something like 29 gigawatts. So realizing even half of the potential could power millions of houses, and also create jobs and significantly reduce resilience towards fossil fuels. However, yes, there are challenges. One of them is technically geothermal development requires high upfront investment and specialized experts to locate and access these deep reservoirs that are typically at a depth of at least 2 to 3 kilometers, sometimes 4 to 5 underground. And this cost is sometimes a barrier, especially for developing economies. Economically, there is also this long-term commitment. So while geothermal plants have low operational costs, the initial phase demand is substantial, which often necessitate of a private and public partnership to make it valuable. Another part is about the regulatory barriers that are an obstacle. Permitting processes that are lengthy and complex. They often involve multiple agencies, which slows down the progress. And additionally, there is, of course, the risk associated with seismic activities. We had a few cases around the world in Europe and in the US. And there is, of course, environmental concern about that. But I truly believe that with careful science-based management, we can gain the public support and regulatory backing.
Okay, now we have some time for Q&A, but before that, can we have the Mentimeter QR code on screen? Okay, so there's two ways to ask questions. One would be scanning this, or you can just raise up your hands and ask questions. But may I request you to direct the question to each panelist, because since the three of them are in different parts of the world, they can't even do this. You know, so yeah, please direct it to them specifically. So any questions? Maybe we can take an in-person question first. Anyone wants to raise up their hands? Okay. Yes, sir. Can we have the, yeah.
Hey, Joshua here. So I'm just curious, because you mentioned data centers, and I guess there are
Sorry, may I ask, is the question for Genvi?
Yes.
Okay, great, yeah.
So because you mentioned data centers, and I think it's implicit that in order for data centers to benefit from solar renewables, you need to have that intermediary battery system. Yeah. Right. I think that was alluded, but is that the only way, or are there better ways? I'm asking out of ignorance, and I think even in terms of how we store energy, because there are many flavors, there are the sand batteries, there are the hydro dams that uses potential energy, and so forth. Are there methods which are better adapted for the region, or is our best bet battery systems, solar renewables, but dumping energy into the batteries so that the batteries can then provide regulated, consistent power to the downstream beneficiaries? Is that the only way? That's my first question. My second question would be, is it even viable to talk to certain sectors to simply live with lower reliability, meaning that maybe you need that power during specific time zones, but it's not 24/7. Again, I'm asking out of ignorance.
Okay, I'll answer the first question first. Actually, REX is the alternative to all your questions that you ask, and it has been very, very effective and useful for the last 20 years in like I said, in Europe and US. So the way REX is being utilized and measured and used by the corporate buyers in especially the data centers in the context of global and also in Singapore, is the fact that REX is being measured either on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis, right? So I'm a data center. I consume 100 units of power across the entire year, and I will buy 100 units of REX that is generated across the entire year. And this is a well-recognized, understood, and legitimate claim as per RU100 GHG protocol SPTI, right? REX is a methodology that is well recognized, is as recognized as ISO, right? So With this said, technically addresses all your problems because it doesn't need to meet on a timing basis. Even though there are talks, in Europe by European Union, if you guys are familiar with this concept called CBAM, cross-border adjustment mechanism, whereby some of these requests, in particular green hydrogen, you are required to prove that your hydrogen is being produced by renewable power on an hourly basis to be implemented 2030 and beyond, right? 2026 implementation guideline does not have that yet. There are corporates in the likes of Google and Microsoft who is looking for hourly matching power, right? So this is the baseline. Then to answer your question, is battery the only way to ensure that I'm matching the generation of power that is green to my consumption? The straight answer is yes. Unfortunately, in the context of Singapore, you do not have the luxury of having wind because we just don't have enough wind even though we are surrounded by water. And you do not have the luxury of having huge rivers and high mountains for hydroelectric power, and not to mention pump storage, which you are talking about. So unfortunately in Singapore, the only way for you to have real-time electricity is batteries, right? I strongly believe battery cost is going to drop to a point whereby solar plus battery is cheaper than coal. I think it's less than 10 years. In fact, I think it might be less than 5 because in some country it's already a reality. And I personally don't foresee that as a problem, right? Talking about, but do we really need that, right? I mean, to me, do you need to incur additional battery costs just to make sure that you're consuming power on a 7/24 basis? Or is it more important to ensure that whatever additional cost as an energy user, whatever additional cost that you're willing to pay beyond the cheapest electricity on earth is something that can enable you to build even more renewable power plants? So in today's context, geography location is a big barrier, right? RE100 GHG protocol says that if you want to consume renewable power, it has to be within the same country boundary. So in the context of Singapore, where there are a lot of huge demand for power that is green, Singapore unfortunately doesn't have the right resources to build. But our neighbors, Malaysia, Indonesia, right, even Laos or Cambodia, do have the ability to build these resources and send the electrons into Singapore, of which I'm sure many of you here understood that, the last couple of years this has been a big topic, right? Talking about import electricity from our neighbors. So if we can get over the fact that the entire Asia is, let's talk about Southeast Asia as one big entity, because at the end of the day, we are all talking about the same atmosphere that's receiving the CO2, right? So can we think of ASEAN as one big entity and work together? Can we think about Asia as an entity to work together? Can we even think about the globe as an entity to work together? Right? That's the original concept of carbon in the first place, right? So this is a topic that I think we should all ponder more, right? Back to your question, the answer is we don't even. My personal view is that we need to ensure that more renewable power plants are being built, regardless of whether it's Singapore or Malaysia or Indonesia, right? Because we are all sharing the same sky, right? That's number one. Number two, whether we can achieve that, right? To me today, the barrier is not commercials. The barrier is individual countries' political motivation to ensure this happens across countries. It's hard, right? Europe takes 20, 30 years to form EU, right? And it's still extremely complex. Yeah. So in this part of the world, I think I'm beginning to see a lot of political will across various countries wanting to make cross-border transactions work so that we don't have to deploy batteries. But deploying batteries, in my opinion, is not so much of a problem of the corporates wanting to buy power that is at night. It's more of a grid stability issue, right? It's a government issue, it's a grid stability issue. In fact, the regulator has a very strong motivation to ensure that the electricity, the grid, doesn't suffer from intermittency, right? And I remember your next question is about, can we, I'm not sure whether I got your question right? Can we give, more reliable electricity to A and less reliable electricity to B? I've asked this question before, but the answer is no, because there's only one grid. Unless you're saying that, Singapore can divide itself into two different grids. This grid is 99.99 availability. This grid is 99.91 availability. And the electricity price here is cheaper. The electricity price here is more expensive. Technically, it's not very viable. So the country has no choice but to offer availability that is meeting the most stringent one, right? Which is essentially, in this case, the data center. Because the data center also hosts important applications like stock exchange, right?
Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. We have a question on our Mentimeter. So I'll just read it out for everyone. So this is directed to Luca. Isn't cost of electricity a main driver of uptake and interest from investors? So as initial costs are high, but long-term costs cheap, can investors help to remove the front load and so uptake? So it's a lot about costs. So what do you have to say about that, Luca, if you can answer?
Yes, you are absolutely right. The cost of electricity is a significant factor driving the interest of both the investors and the policymakers. In the case of geothermal energy, like renewable sources involving high initial capital costs, primarily due to for example, the drilling and the infrastructure. That is the case for geothermal energy. However, once the system are in place, the operational costs, as I said before, are relatively low, and geothermal energy can be produced as a stable, continuous energy. So in case of investors, we know that they play a critical role here in helping the offset of these upfront costs through various financial models like a PPAS, power purchase agreements, or green bonds, which can spread an initial investment over a certain period of time and is usually more manageable. With the financial support, the geothermal project can become viable and also an attractive way much earlier. And it can also help to speed up this adoption of helping countries during this phase of the transition towards more sustainable energy sources.
Okay. Are there any more questions from the crowd, from the audience? Okay, so I have a question for you. Chen-Wee. So what do you think now, looking forward, is the critical next step in our increasing our reliance on renewable energy and adoption of renewable energy? What is the critical next step?
I will speak from the perspective of the global south, or maybe in particular in Asia, Southeast Asia. I think it's very important for costs to come down for adoption, right? Just now I saw a chart talking about the growth of electricity, as a proportion of total energy usage, right? And I saw hydrogen and ammonia, the percentage is quite small, right? I want to share with you guys my view and my experience on how solar energy has grown, right? When I first started in the solar industry 20 years ago, solar adoption is tiny globally, right? Maybe not globally at that time. US, Europe has already a lot adopted, but really tiny as compared to how Asia has grown over the last 20 years. So when I first started in the solar industry, solar panels is $5 per watt. Solar panel only. Today, it's almost 50 cents per watt for the entire system. Not only solar panel, right? So, and at that time, when you start to see forecast, our DMV friend has presented earlier, the forecast, right? The forecast of growth of renewable, over the next 20 years. Usually you see a chart that grows like that. Sometimes it's a little bit, the curve is not so steep from now to the next 10, 20 years. My experience seeing how the solar industry grows, every year, everyone will redraw that chart, right? Every year, the chart that is being redrawn to forecast the next 10 years goes up. So what does it mean? It means the actual solar installation that materialize globally every year is higher than the forecast the year before. And it persists for 10 to 20 years that the forecast is consistently being beaten by actuals. And it all, I mean, from a specific solar perspective, a lot of credit has to go into, China bring the cost of panels, cost of inverters, cost of structures down significantly. So what I want to drive across is, for this to grow, for renewable to grow, it has to go beyond electricity already, right? Because when it comes to scope 1 emission on transportation, hydrogen and ammonia becomes a very critical part of the entire ecosystem. And my personal view is the growth of hydrogen, right, today is massively expensive, right? There's no economics, right? It will reach a point, the reason why I brought across the point of solar, my personal opinion is the cost of hydrogen or ammonia as either a feedstock into electricity production or transportation, marine fuel in particular, or land transport, is going to beat every single forecast every year for the next 10 to 20 years. Right? That's my view. Borrowing the example of solar PV, that has happened for the last 20 years, right? Reason being, number one, the main cost of green hydrogen production through electrolyzer comes from the product itself, the electrolyzer, right? And the source of electricity. The source of electricity is going to go down significantly, and the source of hydrogen, the equipment to produce hydrogen is going to come down significantly, and it's all down to transportation, right? And my view is it's extremely important to start adopting what we call the book and claim mechanism, whereby you produce green hydrogen in a geography that can use the hydrogen in situ, right? And produce the cert, and this cert, it goes to another geography location for them to claim, in area where they're willing to pay the extra, and where production of this hydrogen is far too expensive in that country. Just as an example, right? To produce hydrogen in Indonesia and use the cert for hydrogen usage in Singapore, right? So this is my view on moving forward for the next decade. I'm reasonably positive about the fact that mechanisms like hydrogen or ammonia is going to play a really big role. Yeah.
Also ask Yamashita, what do you think in your point of view, especially in Japan, what is the critical next step?
Yep. Now the Japanese government and the Ministry of Economy make discussion on Japan's new energy basic plan that will talk about a 2040 target of electricity. Then we set a more high target for renewable energy, then another policy support for renewable energy project. And from our business side, we want to establish the business scheme for PPA, power purchase agreement, whether a small or distributed renewable energy project and a small and distributed power consumers. Currently, the big power producers and big companies can make a PPA agreement, but now in Japan, from the problem of the regulations, it's difficult to such distributed power source and distributed consumers. But if we can make it, our community-based project can be purchased by the small and local companies or small power consumers. That will be a good help for our community-based project. Thank you.
And just to have a brief, because we have 5 minutes left, for Luca, what do you think is a critical next step? Especially in, like we covered RAC, we covered community-based, consensus-based, renewable initiatives, but how about in geothermal? What do you think is the critical next step? And if you can talk more about Singapore?
Yes, well, we need to leverage an integrated approach. So we need to combine geothermal and solar power with energy storage solutions. So in that sense, I think here we all agree with that. Also, hearing the answer that we got from the other panelists, solar has a tremendous power across Southeast Asia, and geothermal can also help as a base load demand, ensuring this reliable energy. And also there is carbon capture and storage, which is, I think, essential in Southeast Asia, because it works to decarbonize industries that they can't immediately transition towards renewables. This can be the case for steel and cement. So emerging technology in direct air capture could potentially even allow us to reverse carbon emissions and transforming the energy sector from a source emission to part of the solution. Instead of focusing on Singapore, I definitely agree with Wee that we should instead take it broadly and actually involve and think about as Southeast Asia as a unique entity in that sense. This is, of course, what I hope for the future.
Okay, thank you so much, all three of you.